I mean, I was just half a step late, basically, in any shot. So it's very as simple as that. He was just a level or more better than I was, and I was just,
There is a moment in every great champion's story where the body starts writing checks the legend can no longer cash. For Novak Djokovic, that moment arrived under the grey skies of SW19, on a court where he had once seemed untouchable. On grass he had conquered again and again across 2 decades of ruthless dominance. But this time, something was different. This time, the king of Wimbledon looked human. The scoreboard told a brutal story. Straight sets, no drama, no late-set heroics, none of the trademark defiance that had defined his career. For a man who had turned 5-set escapes into an art form, who had built his legend on refusing to die on any court, anywhere, against anyone, this was almost unrecognizable. And for 2 weeks, the world was left to wonder, what happened to Novak Djokovic? Let's rewind. Before the humiliation, before the straight-set beatdown that shocked the tennis world, there was a war fought in the shadows of the earlier rounds, a war nobody was talking about, but one that would decide everything. Djokovic had clawed his way through the draw. Wu Yibing, Arthur Rinderknech, Roman Safiullin, 3 names that, on paper, shouldn't have troubled a 24-time Grand Slam champion. But each match dragged past the 3-hour mark. Each one chipped away at something invisible: energy, recovery, time. And then came the quarterfinal. Felix Auger-Aliassime. 5 sets, 5 hours and 15 minutes. The longest quarterfinal in the history of the tournament. Think about that for a second. 5 hours, on grass, at 38 years old. It was a gladiator's battle, the kind of match that becomes legend regardless of the result. Djokovic survived it. He walked off that court a winner. But victory, this time, came with a hidden cost. A debt that would come due just days later against the one man waiting for him on the other side of the draw, Jannik Sinner. And here is where the story turns dark. Sinner had breezed through his side of the bracket, arriving at the semifinal fresh, sharp, and rested, 3 full hours less on court than his aging rival. 3 hours. In elite sport, that's not a small gap. That's the difference between legs that explode into a first serve and legs that simply don't. The semifinal itself became almost a formality. Djokovic, the man who had outwilled and outfought the world for 2 decades, looked half a step slow. His movement lacked its usual venom. His serve, the one weapon that had bailed him out of trouble 1,000 times before, betrayed him when he needed it most. Across the entire match, he could only manufacture a single breakpoint. One, against a man who broke him with chilling efficiency again and again. It wasn't just a loss. It was a dismantling. Straight sets, no fight back, no vintage Djokovic scowl and comeback theater. Just silence and the sinking realization that something fundamental had shifted. For 2 weeks, the tennis world buzzed with theories. Was this the end? Had Sinner simply become unplayable? Was Father Time finally, mercilessly, closing in? And then Djokovic spoke. In a raw, unusually candid sit-down, he peeled back the curtain on what had really happened out there. He didn't make excuses about Sinner. He was careful, almost reverent, in praising the young Italian's brilliance. But he also revealed the brutal mathematics working against him. Every match now, he explained, is a search for margins, tiny percentages, fractional edges, anything he can scrape together to keep competing with players half his tennis age. But the body, he admitted, responds differently now. That's not opinion. That's biology. 20-plus years at the summit of the most physically unforgiving sport in the world leaves scars you cannot see on television. Recovery, once a given, is now a daily negotiation. And after that brutal 5-hour war against Auger-Aliassime, there simply wasn't enough time, or enough gas in the tank, to summon the version of himself that could stand toe-to-toe with Sinner. He walked onto that court already running on fumes. And Sinner, ruthless, precise, unbothered, made him pay for every missing ounce of energy. But here's the twist buried inside this story, the part that turns a simple tale of decline into something far more layered. This wasn't a one-off. This was a pattern. Rewind further, to the clay of Roland Garros. There, too, Djokovic was ambushed early, pushed past 3 hours by Giovanni Pecha, tested again by Valentin Royer, before eventually falling to a fearless teenager, João Fonseca, in a result that sent shockwaves through the sport. Different tournament, different opponent, same haunting theme. A champion bled dry before the tournament's biggest tests even arrived. And yet, and this is crucial, the story is not one of total surrender. Rewind to January, to the Australian Open, where fate handed Djokovic something rare, a walkover in one round, a merciful mid-match retirement in another. Precious rest, precious recovery. And what happened when the Serb actually arrived at a semifinal against Sinner with something left in the tank? An epic, a 5-set war for the ages, fought toe-to-toe, that could have gone either way. That is the haunting truth at the center of this entire saga. When Djokovic has legs, he still has magic. When he has time to recover, he can still stand across the net from the man dominating this era and make him sweat, make him doubt, make him work for every single point. The problem was never his heart, or his hands, or his mind. The problem is time itself, the merciless, ticking clock of a body that has given everything for over 2 decades. Now consider the brutal road ahead. Sinner has won 6 of the last 7 meetings between these two rivals. 6 of 7. The serve, once a Djokovic trademark of terror, has become a puzzle he cannot solve against the Italian's return game. One break point in an entire Grand Slam semifinal tells its own devastating story. So here is the real question haunting the back half of Djokovic's career, the one nobody can answer yet. Can he find a way to survive the early rounds without bleeding away the very fuel he needs for the fights that matter? Can he somehow arrive at the business end of a slam fresh enough, sharp enough, dangerous enough, to stand across the net from Sinner as an equal and not a fading echo of himself? Because make no mistake, this is not simply the story of one bad semifinal at Wimbledon. This is the story of a legend racing against his own body, chasing one more mountain, number 25, knowing that every extra minute spent surviving the early rounds is a minute stolen from the war that truly decides his legacy. The body may be slowing, but the fire is still there. Picture him now, in some quiet training room far from the cameras, chasing the smallest of details, a recovery protocol tweaked by minutes, a schedule shaved down by hours, anything that might buy him one more ounce of freshness when it matters most. That is the reality of championship tennis in your late 30s. Greatness no longer comes from raw talent alone. It comes from a war of inches fought behind closed doors, invisible to everyone except the man living it. And that is precisely why this story refuses to end quietly. For every whisper that Djokovic is finished, there is a 5-set classic in Melbourne to remind the world otherwise. For every straight sets defeat that looks like the closing of an era, there is the memory of a man who has rewritten what a tennis body can endure long after lesser champions had already walked away. The question is no longer whether Novak Djokovic can still play at the highest level. He has already answered that. The real question is whether the calendar will cooperate, whether the draws will show mercy, whether his body will hold long enough for one more shot at history against the very best of this new generation. Because somewhere out there, a 25th Grand Slam title is still waiting. And whether Djokovic reaches it may not be decided by his forehand, or his footwork, or his famous, unbreakable will. It may be decided by something simpler and far crueler, by the ticking of a clock that no champion, no matter how great, has ever managed to silence.